If you want to improve your back squat, go to the link below, download the Sika Strength app. There's 2 squat programs on it currently. They're wildly successful, the RTA 1 and the RTA 2.0. They add massive kilos to people's squats. People run them over and over again, incredibly successful. And you can run 2 programs at any time on the app for the price of your subscription and change between those programs at will. I guarantee you a lot of you are making one or more of these mistakes that we're going to see. You guys send in your videos to be absolutely annihilated, and I've been listening to 3 Days Grace while I put these together. So some of you are going to get annihilated. I'm joking. Let's go. This is a really interesting problem that I see a lot, especially with people who are not at the top end of the best strength they could have, more of a kind of beginner to intermediate. Now, this is actually a really good quality squat. But a lot of times what we're looking for when we're coaching and when we're looking at technique is not necessarily what the problem now is. It's what are you doing now that probably will cause a problem in the future once we add more weight. Now, what I'm seeing here is the bracing, and we can see multiple different breaths when we're standing in this position. So the actual squat mechanics itself are good. He squats down, decent distribution between his quads and his hips, his knees and his hips. He descends in good fashion, hits a super deep squat, really nice back position, maintains that back position really well. But we can see at the start, before he goes, he takes some really big breaths. We can see that diaphragm and that stomach moving in and out a lot. This is a super common thing that people will do when they're newer to lifting. Now, make no mistake, 182.5 kilos is a very, very respectable squat, especially to this depth and with this technique. So make no mistake, I'm not talking shit on 182 at all. It's a great squat. But what I'm seeing here is that if we make this mistake of really aggressive breathing as we get to heavier weights, what will probably happen is we won't be able to maintain and recover that position. So we need to be as refined and precise as possible with our movements, especially bracing. So I've no problem with the actual bracing he's using. I've no problem with the position he hits when he braces. But when we organize ourselves, when we're standing before we go for a squat, we need to get this done as efficiently and as quickly as possible. And so what I would be worried about here is that as the weights get heavier, what we're probably going to see is that he won't be able to recover those positions. Because if you think each time we take a breath and then we let it go, we're losing that back position, we're losing the tightness in our core, then we try and recover it. But with a really heavy bar in your back, what if he tries to squat 220 kilos? There's different brackets of weights, and I can assure you those weights do get heavier. And if we try and do this disorganized breathing, this repeated breathing where we're going in and out, you're going to lose your position and not be able to recover it as well. So make this as precise and as confined as possible to the minimum number of breaths before we go to the squat. This is sometimes a learned habit. Sometimes it's a nervous habit for some people. They're trying to delay or get a little bit tighter. But when you think about it, the tightening and contracting and relaxing isn't improving the brace. Each brace is separate from the last one. And so unless we hit a poor one and then need to reorganize ourselves, or if we've done sets of 8 and we're trying to go for another 2 reps, okay, fair enough, take a couple of breaths, no problem. But when we're going for a 1 rep max, organize yourself in the minimum number of breaths possible and maintain that as much as you can. In general, the squat mechanics are good. Could pick apart the timing of the hips a little bit, but I'm not really too concerned about that. The big thing I want to pick out from this one is the bracing and how often it's done. A long-legged lifter for sure. Decent quality squat. Really keeps his positions nice and consistent, which I'm pretty happy with. But if we go to the descent, so if we're in the bottom position, everything is good here. Very nice squat, upright, very deep squat, fantastic. But as soon as we begin to squat up, we'll see that the hips are really dominating the movement. What this means is those hips are swinging up much more aggressively than the knees are moving forward. And then when we get to this point, well above parallel, where it should be relatively easy for us to finish the squat, we can see that someone of Paris's build is going to find this even more difficult if we let the hips dominate the squat. So if you're someone with a really long legs compared to your torso, if it looks like your torso is a smaller percentage of your body height than might otherwise be ideal for other people squatting, this kind of squat is going to make it even worse for you. You're going to make it even harder for you. So we get to the bottom, all good. Now watch the hips. Hips immediately swing up. They dominate the movement. We'll see that torso incline really aggressively. And then as a result, it's very hard to finish the squat from where it shouldn't be. Now everyone has the same sticking point. It's a little bit lower than this. It's probably around here. Most of you will probably miss your squats around here or here, which is fine. That's going to happen. Everyone's sticking point is the same sticking point. But we shouldn't be seeing such a difficulty at this portion of the rep. And that is because as he begins to squat up, the hips immediately shoot backwards and dominate the movement. So what you need to focus on here, especially in this style of squat, is pushing the knees forward, keeping the hips in as you stand up. So knees go forward, hips stay in as you stand up, trying to keep that torso upright. Now, for someone of his build, we're not always going to see the most perfectly upright, consistent back angle all the time, but this is definitely too much of a change, and we can see this when we're well above the parallel position. Those hips are still dominating, and this is going to make it really harder at heavier weights. Ronaldo is another long-legged lifter with that shorter torso, so some people obviously are built like this, and it's not the 100% most ideal squat. However, Ronaldo has got great mechanics in terms of the squat down, very good mobility, but what catches him again is the ascent, and you'll see that as we're looking at two similar body shaped people, it's a similar issue causing the degradation of the squat. So if we watch, got great mobility, which is the first thing. If you're in this position, if you've got this build and you love squatting, make your priority, the first thing to do is get the best possible mobility you can. Get the best possible ankle, hip, thoracic mobility, shoulder mobility. Get everything as good as you can possibly make it. This is the foundation of the quality of movement for you, because if you have these good positions, it'll give you opportunity to be stronger in those better positions. But if you can't access the positions you need to hit because you don't have a great build for squatting, you're not going to be able to strengthen them because you won't be able to get to those ranges of motion. So if we look at the mechanics of the squat, we'll see that as he begins to squat down, we're slightly seeing the hips lead back just a little bit too early. Now he has excellent ankle mobility and hip mobility by the looks of things. So if we look at the bottom position, we'll see that as he's at the bottom, we'll see the knees are really far forward, really deep hip flexion here. This is as deep as he could get. Great position. But the issue is, again, the hips are leading the movement when we don't want that to happen. Now, he has good forward knee travel, but he has slightly more rearward hip travel than we would like. And as the reps go on and as the fatigue sets in, we'll see that the hips travel back a little bit more on the descent and the hips travel back just a little bit more on the rise up. So what we really have to focus on here is keeping those hips in and keeping the knees driving forward. So we can watch on the last rep. So we'll watch the descent. Watch his knees. So we hit the bottom. Great forward knee travel here, a little bit lower, excellent. But then you'll see, watch the knees again, you'll see that the knees will immediately move backwards here and the hips will move with it, and then we'll see a corresponding reduction in that upper back extension. We'll see much more upper back flexion here, which is what we don't want for the high bar Olympic style squat. If I were a 1950s strongman writing a magazine, the Olympic squat is how I would refer to it. So if we watch, hips back, and then we'll see the hips taking over and that upper back position losing a position when it doesn't necessarily need to. It's all about the hips sometimes. We've got a very nice quality squat here, but we've got some interesting issues, and it's one that a lot of people deal with, and this is something I deal with myself and something I constantly need to work on. So if we watch the squat itself, great maintenance of positions as we go through the squat, which is fantastic. That's a great attribute to have. But if we watch, okay, just before he starts, Danny's head down, okay, gets set up into a good position. I like this position. This is good. But as soon as he begins the squat, immediately loses that position. So we're immediately sending the hips back, immediately letting the torso drift forward. Now he's keeping a solid head position, but even as we get to the bottom, the head is drifting forward. And as a result, all that good work that he's put into maintaining that position for the high bar squat is immediately lost. So what's the cause of this issue, or what are the symptoms of why this happens? So the first one is simply that we need to focus on this position more. So a lot of times we'll get people, you'll start the repetition and you'll put yourself in a position which is a great position like this. But as soon as we begin the squat, we absolutely SHIT the bed, the proverbial bed, and we just forget about all the positions that we were trying to maintain as well as we could, and we immediately drop this. This is something I do. One of my issues is, for example, when I'm trying to hold a barbell and I don't want my elbows to shift up as I begin squatting, I want to keep this up. What'll often happen is my elbows will shift up and my grip will loosen despite my best intentions. Now, I can do it when I focus on it. So this is really a conscious thing to focus on, is maintaining that position. Because Danny Boy has the requisite mobility to maintain these positions, I suspect he has the requisite strength given that he maintains the position that he hits really well. What I would like is for those positions to stay this. So if we watch the chain of events as he begins to squat, head is up, great. But as soon as he begins to squat, head immediately moves. And you can try this with me here, okay? So tuck your chin, turn your head forward, tilt your head forward, and then try and extend your upper back as much as you possibly can. Now lift up your neck and see how much more range of motion you can get if you bring that chin up. But you can see the opposite happening here for Danny is he's dropping his head, and as a result then the chest must follow. The spine follows the head position. As a result, we're definitely in a place where we are going to be punished as weights get heavier. So watch that trend. Always think, okay, this is okay now, but will this be okay in 10, 15, 20 or 50 kilos time? And a lot of times the answer is no. So we need to be super conscious of what we're doing. Okay, next up we've got Guilherme. Is it Portuguese? Eu não falo português. I don't speak Portuguese. Maybe it's French. Might be an insult to him. Maybe not. 210 kilos. Now again, we're going to watch the head position here. This is a low bar squat, and I like a lot of the things about this squat, but watch that head position as we get set. And this is kind of that opposite problem, similar to the first one we were looking at in regards to setting yourself before the brace and minimizing movement and making the brace as good as possible. For me, I know when I'm walking out of squat that if I unrack it in the right position and I'm standing in the right position and I start the rep in the right position, there's a huge chance I'm going to dominate the squat. But if I mess up any parts of that walkout, the unrack or the set before I begin squatting, I know it's not going to be good as quality squat as it could be. And so what's happening here is that as he's bracing, the head is down and then he's lifting his head up, but immediately begins the squat. Now, what's the issue with this? There's two issues. One, we're probably not going to be able to hit a really consistent brace if we do this too often, because the positions will be slightly different every time. If we rush the brace and then go into the squat, if we condense this time too quickly, we're never going to hit that full brace that we could possibly hit. The other problem with this is I don't like large movements in the brace. I don't like large joint angle changes when we're getting set up. So head going from here to here along with that chest is too much. I want to organize more of that before I begin the unrack. So when I'm walking out, I want to be in a good position and I want to be very close to my ideal position before I begin the squat. I only want small changes of the joints, usually the thoracic, maybe the lower back, possibly the foot position in terms of if you are someone who likes to screw their feet out, then we can achieve those positions. But I don't like big changes because this punishes our back position, it punishes our brace. Generally, it means we're not going to be able to hit as good a quality brace as possible. And so as a result, we're going to mess up these heavier weights. So again, we're always thinking about what would the following weights look like. So head position, set the brace for longer here before you begin squatting. Reduce the joint movements of the head and the neck. Get more set up before you begin the brace as you're unracking it. But we've got some barefoot squats here, and this is a really beginner basic problem that can be very easily fixed. We can see depth isn't fantastic here. Everything else is pretty solid. I think the squat mechanics themselves are decent, but we're really lacking ankle mobility. We're really lacking the ability to get a bit of a deeper squat. What's going to happen if he tries to get deeper here? He's going to send his hips back further. We're going to see more of an incline on the torso, and as a result, we're just not going to have a very good quality squat. There's one thing that we can do here that's very, very simple, and I'm sure a lot of you are guessing already, and that's get a pair of weightlifting shoes. The people who can decide not to wear weightlifting shoes are people who can squat massive weights already. If you can squat 250 plus and you're like, for me, I just think barefoot is much better. In that case, if you come to me with that and you're squatting 250 plus high bar or even low bar, and you're like, I've played around with it a lot and I've tried weightlifting shoes and I squat barefoot, and you're like, hey, for me, I really think the barefoot squat just gives me that better feeling. Then I will be like, okay, cool, let's work with that. But for everyone else underneath that, I need you to try weightlifting shoes. Now, the thing is, weightlifting shoes are very cheap. You can get dirt cheap weightlifting shoes. I got my first pair of weightlifting shoes as a gift. Someone gave me a pair of their old weightlifting shoes. I did my first 10 months of weightlifting in these gifted weightlifting shoes. My brother gave them to me. He also gave me my first pair of bumper plates. So shout out to him for helping me get set up there. So for you, Curio, get a pair of weightlifting shoes. This is a very simple fix to the problem. You won't look back. Just look at the positions you'll hit. You'll get deeper positions. You'll have a more stable base underneath your foot. And you'll see for the vast majority of people, when you put on weightlifting shoes or squatting shoes, if you don't do weightlifting, you'll immediately see a drastic improvement in the quality and feel of your squat. One thing to note, of course, is here's load management, that when we put on weightlifting shoes, we're going to get a deeper squat. We're going to see more knee travel. We're going to get more hip flexion. And as a result, something might get a little bit sore in the short term. So the important thing to do when you get weightlifting shoes after never having worn them before is really slowly increment the loads. Don't introduce them at a heavy phase, give them a couple of sessions to acclimatize before you start pushing. Just give it a couple of weeks to get used to the weightlifting shoes, because it's a new range of motion and we can put different loads on different soft tissues, and as a result might see some pain in the knees or the hips or even the ankles. So just be cautious of that. Now this is a really nice squat in a very cool looking gym, by the way. But there's one small issue that I want to look at that will probably cause some issues as he gets heavier again. Because even though we're making this squat, 220 kilos high bar, excellent squat by the way, we're always thinking about, okay, what is going to happen in the future? And in regards to this change, this is a relatively small error. He does a lot of things right. And for a lot of these other changes, when you're looking at the squats, they're going to be big changes that you need to make to your squat, and they'll make a big difference. But for Slick here, I also wanted to show some smaller issues that will make a big difference, because when the weights do get to 240 or 250 plus, hopefully he can get there, he's going to be looking at being punished a lot harder for this. So for me, by and large, the descent is pretty solid. He's in a good rack position. I like the barbell height on his back. He starts with a pretty nice distribution between his quads and his hips. But as we get to above that parallel position, what we start to see is the inward travel of the knees. Some people don't like calling it knee valgus or vagal movement or dynamic knee valgus. I don't particularly care. A lot of research in reference to squatting mechanics will call it dynamic knee valgus. I am not a researcher. I don't publish papers. We all understand colloquially what I mean when I say knee valgus, but let's call it knee collapse for the sake of an argument. Some people will say that the certain conditions need to be met before we can call it dynamic knee valgus. I'm not one of the people who are writing these papers, so knee valgus or knee collapse for me isn't the major problem. But what's happening here is that as we get above the parallel position, we can see that the knees have drifted inside the line of the toes, and what happens here is the hips will make a corresponding shift back. Now the argument here, some tentative research which I'm not a huge fan of right now, or rather I don't necessarily believe in practicality, will say that the adductor magnus is more engaged here to extend the hips. I will 100% agree that we are clearly trying to extend the hips more efficiently. However, in isolation of a 220 kilo barbell on your back, this is fine. This is totally acceptable. This is very okay. This is okay. We're saying that the adductors are helping extend the hips. Great. I agree with that. That is fine. However, we also need to remember that on the other end of his torso is 220 kilos. And what happens when we see knee valgus in most male lifters is that the knees don't move forward. The knees will push in. And at this crucial point, we want these knees traveling forward. See where we are here, and you can see the frame change. So as we're here, the knees move in drastically. And what happens is the hips shoot back. And when the hips shoot back, the weight generally is pushed forward. And when we get to this tipping point where the weights get heavy enough, we're going to tip forward, and it's going to be very punishing. We're not going to make the rep. We're going to have to dump the barbell forward or backwards, or we won't be able to finish the squat. So how do we fix knee valgus? Sometimes it's a mobility issue. Don't think it's a mobility issue here. I could be wrong. It's hard to see from the video. I don't particularly think it's a strength issue. I think it's just a learned position. A very easy way of fixing knee valgus, easy, that's not the right word. A very simple way of fixing knee valgus, when it's not mobility or strength, when it's just a technique issue, is really focusing on pushing the knees forward and keeping the hips in. For most male lifters, I'm saying male for a very particular reason, when we keep the hips pushed in and the knees traveling forward, we won't see the huge amount of knee valgus or knee collapse here that we might normally see. Now, I said male lifters for a good reason, because female lifters often have a huge amount of excess mobility, and when their knees collapse, we'll often see a corresponding forward travel of the knee and the hips will move in. So what we want to see here is a tracking of the knees over the toe. And for Slick Rick, we can probably focus on this by pushing the hips forward into the barbell. This will force the knees to stay forward and usually result in the knee staying over the toe. So a small problem, but again, those weights get very heavy and we need to be conscious of the technique we're using. Phil is an interesting case because Phil is descending in knee valgus, and then as a result are in an inward travel of the knee, whatever you want to call it, with 135 kilos here. Now the issue with this is that if we're descending with knees tracking inwards, we're always going to end up in a position where the knees are going to come back in. So if you watch the bottom of these squats, for example, you'll see that Phil's knees actually move out at the bottom. So we'll hit the bottom here and we'll actually see that they'll open up further. So we obviously need some internal rotation to hit the bottom of the squat. Perfectly fine. Hip external rotation, internal rotation are both very important for a deep high bar squat like this. But then as we begin the descent, we can see that he's descending in a inward traveling of the knee. The knee is moving inside the line of the knee before we get to the bottom. And then when he hits the bottom, we actually push those knees out a small bit because it opens up the hips a little bit more. But then as we begin to squat up, we're seeing a lot of aggressive knee valgus position here, or again, the knees collapsing inwards. This here, in my opinion, is most likely a strength issue. Now, unless we did some tests for hip external rotation, internal rotation, which we can't do with this kind of video, but I would suspect, again, Phil, not making any aspersions, again, these are just form checks. I think stronger quads would solve a huge amount of this issue looking at this. I think a bit more muscle mass in the quads, a bit more direct quad work would be very, very useful. Belt squats, split squats, some lunges, some quad extensions would be very, very useful. Give it 2 months of this, get diligent with them, some higher volume squats, then possibly some slower tempo squats. I think we'd see a nice improvement in this, because I think this is the major issue that is causing a problem here. A secondary issue is that the chest is slightly down a little bit in the start position and the head is slightly forward. So this is going to predispose us to a bit more upper back flexion when we have that chin forward, like we've been talking about earlier. But in this position, I think the lower body is a bigger concern. I still would like to see that head up a little bit more and the chest up with it, but I don't think it's causing, or it's the leading cause of the knee collapse here. I think we've got bigger fish to fry first. Secondary would be the head position, but it's not a major concern right now. This is similar to some of the other squats we've seen. You'll see a trend here when we're always looking at form reviews, is that most people make very, very similar issues. So the big thing here for me is the head position on the low bar squat. A lot of people think when we're low bar squatting that we want a downward head position and that we don't want the extended upper back. And this makes sense to a certain extent. Obviously, if we have an extended back, the barbell is probably going to be pushed a little bit further back. We're not going to be able to maintain the low bar position, and as a result, we're going to lose the benefits of the low bar, or we just won't be able to hold the barbell on our back. But you'll see as James is squatting, his head is down, but even he lifts it up to balance his position. Our body is fantastic at trying to correct positions or doing its best to meet the demands of the job we're trying to place in it. And you'll see head is down as he begins squatting, but then as he begins to squat, he lifts his head up in the start position. But what I would like to see here is lifting that head up a little bit more at the start. Now, you don't need to lift the head up and bring the thoracic with it. I think the low bar position here is a good solid position. It looks pretty tight. And we're actually not seeing a huge amount of change in back flexion, which lets us know that you're probably in a good position with the barbell, but the torso angle is changing. And this is changing as a result of the neck and head position. So as we begin the squat, again, I like the positions in terms of the hip and knee movement. The hips do shift back, but I think a lot of this is actually coming from that head position at the start. So if we kept that head up even a little bit more than what you're doing when you're squatting, James, I think we'd be able to see a better position of the hips staying forward. You'd be able to keep the nips, you'd be able to keep the legs further forward in that position, and as a result then you'd have a better quality squat. So we're not saying he needs to be more upright, but we do need to keep a consistent back angle when we're squatting. So we'll see as he begins the descent, head moves up, but it's already a little bit too late because the head is moving up as he is descending. And as we hit the bottom, I'm pretty happy with that bottom position, but you'll see the knees moving back and it's already too late for the head to correct this. So we want to focus on knees forward and head up in this position as we're beginning the squat, even in the low bar squat. It works really well. Knees out for some people is useful, but for the vast majority, most of everyone I've ever helped at the low bar squat, we've ever helped, the knees forward position is still something we're looking for even with the low bar squat. I hope you enjoyed today's video. We will be doing more of these for sure. Remember, I hope you enjoyed today's video. We'll be doing more of these for sure. I really enjoy doing them, and I think you guys can get a lot out of them because it's very practical and direct to the issues you might be having in your own squat. We will be doing different lifts in the future, but there was a lot of videos sent in for this and I wanted to take advantage of those. Check out the newsletter down below. If you want to improve your back squat, go to the link below, download the Sika Strength app. There's 2 squat programs on it currently. They're wildly successful, the RTA 1 and the RTA 2.0. They add massive kilos to people's squats. People run them over and over again, incredibly successful, and you can run 2 programs at any time on the app for the price of your subscription and change between those programs at will.